C. Michael Smith, PhD, also known as Mikkal, is a Michigan licensed psychologist. He was educated at the University of Chicago and the Chicago Theological Seminary. He holds a certificate in analytical psychology from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago and is a certified focusing trainer of the Focusing Institute of New York. An internationally recognized Jungian scholar, he has taught Jungian psychology and shamanism in Europe and South America. He has a private practice in Michigan. He is the founder of the Crow's Nest Center for Shamanic Studies, and he is the author of Jung and Shamanism in Dialogue and Psychotherapy and the Sacred.
And I would just add that that it's apparent that you're occupying a rare junction here between Jungian theory and Jungian practice and indigenous shamanism, and that you're right there at that junction. There's not too many people there, and so part of your work and part of your dialogue and practice is about this subject of the shadow that we deal with a lot. And so we've been looking forward to interviewing you for a while.
Yeah, we're very honored that you're taking your time to do this with us.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I'm glad to finally be meeting you face to face and doing something. So great.
Maybe you could just start with some background, and I would like to ask you, in a more sort of mythic way, how do you see your own your training and your past and your path as a mythology, and as this role has developed, how do you interpret your own mythology and your own path in this way?
Okay. Well, I was raised in a evangelical Christian family. My father was evangelical minister, and he had a large church and was well known in town. And I was awash in his dogmatic belief system,
right,
which never felt right for me. And in his version of reality, his mythology, almost everybody was going to hell and going to be judged forever and ever because they didn't believe in Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. But my friends at school, my neighbors, I could not believe they were going to hell. And it just really pissed my father off when I asked questions about it, And this went on into college, in fact. He would get so angry he'd want to hit me, just because I asked a question. So finally I read everybody he didn't want me to read, starting with Darwin, and evolution. It wasn't creationism in his sense, and I decided I would spend a whole year reading nothing but what he told me not to read, so the devil wouldn't get hold of my mind. And at the end of that year, I could no longer hold on to anything that he believed or taught me. And so that was the first big, you might say, awakening and liberation. Mm-hmm. But then I didn't know what to believe, because I had nothing to replace it with. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like when Jung and Freud broke up. Jung had adapted to Freud's psychoanalysis, and it was, as he was finding that it doesn't fit him very well, and the lectures he was doing, like at the school in the Bronx, New York University in the Bronx, and at Clark University, he was starting to deviate, and this caused this break with Freud, but Jung didn't really know what his own psychology was. He said, I didn't know what myth I was living by. And so his big crisis came with that, because his identity was as a big medical psychologist and Freud's heir apparent. His identity and his belief that his future was going to be the leadership of the psychoanalytic movement, and it came to a crash almost overnight. So it was a state of trauma, and then with his great courage and resourcefulness, he started doing these shamanic-like descents into the unconscious, even the collective unconscious, And he would be in there for hours, you know. He'd have these long passageways he would go down that would take time, and run across burning sands. He spent a few days living with a monk, an anchorite, you know, and described in great detail his surroundings, his sleeping quarters, the walk along the cliff, along a stairway into his little cottage, and so on, and his lengthy conversations with this guy. So Jung had this great capacity to move into the other world or the unconscious, and to stay there without being totally submerged in it, be conscious in it, you know, and interact. And this is a very big shamanic motif. And about the time that I broke with my father's mythology, I took a course in Jungian religion. Wow. I was excited because, you know, maybe I could find a personal mythology, a personal theology or something to replace what I'd lost. And I remember asking a friend, you know, how do you know there is a God or a spirit or sacred? He goes, "It's my son. He had a 1-year-old kid, you know." And that gave me a clue. It's like, yes, it's in the things around us. It's so close. All we have to do is look. We don't need some creed or Bible or something to find it. So that opened things up. And about that time also, I got interested in Eliade.
Yeah.
And I contacted the man, exchanged some letters with him. And another one of my professors says, "Oh, you're a mystic," you know. He saw I was getting into Jung and to Eliade. But it was really Eliade's big book on shamanism, you know.
Yeah.
And he's the one that invited me to the University of Chicago.
Right.
So there was that, and then there was the psychedelic experience, which I had. The first one, I was 17, but 19 was like a big mystical awakening. And then in graduate school, right towards the end of it, I got into the psychedelics again. And again, it opened up something that looked like what Jung was talking about in the Red Book, you know. Yeah. So I was actually so overwhelmed by the material that was then bursting forth that I got into Jungian analysis.
Right.
And I had 2 sessions with this guy, Tom Kapuscinskis, and he says, "Oh, I know what you're going through. This is a shamanic awakening." You know, he says, what you need is an elder. You know, you need to find someone, you know, to kind of guide you in this process. So I did that, and I live in Southwest Michigan, and I actually live on Potawatomi lands. The Ojibwe and Potawatomi is here, and they speak the same language, so they have the same longhouses, and I kind of pushed my way in and got a mentor. Yeah, and that helps quite a bit. It set me up with some rituals, and you know the rituals or the sacred ceremonies are ways to practice the mythology. You know, the mythology is in, and the stories are in these ceremonies. So that gave me something for a while. But in the end, every person today, especially if you're not a member of an indigenous group, you have to work out your own mythology, you know. I wrote my own creation myth, you know, just and packed my own values into it, you know, so that I had a story to tell.
Yeah, we're having the same problem. Most people who aren't taking on a magician role or who are not sort of living through that archetype, that magician that constantly has to keep on. You know, the magician is always having to keep on getting more and more objective, right? And just seeing more and more of a higher perspective of their own programs and the programs of the culture and all of that, and keep on getting out and out. And then, but the more you get out, the more this type of person gets out of the game, as it were. The more you find that you can't live the mythology, right, of the society as easily, like you just said. And and so you do have to, like you said, write your own mythology. And then I look back, and Melissa and I do this. We look back at our own life, and we try to figure out, okay, well, what is the story? We're not living through this or that cultural mythology so much. So what is the story that's been playing out? And we go back and we go look for all of these index points in our life that are like signposts, that are like markers to show us what is the script that has been written that is playing out now. And it's sort of shocking when you start to put together your own script and you start to realize that there is a script playing out. There is a mythology. There is a self-made...
A greater story. There's a greater story of the universal life force, the archetypal recipe of your life is coming through you, and you can look at your life and start to find the greater story that's coming through you.
And it's shocking, and it's like, whoa, is that really who I am? Is that really what I'm here to do? Do you know what we're saying?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. One way or another, we're going to live out some type of story, and a big story. The mind is always making up stories. But the reason you have to make your own mythology is rooted in the fact that we live in a time when we realize that whatever we believe is just our version of reality. So if we want a mythology to live by, as Joseph Campbell says, we need a really good one. We need to really think about it and work it out. And It needs to have the values that reflect our truth built into it so that it can support us, like a good map or cartography. So, okay, you were asking about my mythology too, and in addition to that Potawatomi teacher I also later got a Cherokee teacher because I have a little Cherokee blood, and then spent 8 years with a guy in Ecuador, Peruvian Taita, or Ecuadorian Taita Yachek. And the teachings were all through storytelling kind of transmissions and through chants, you know. And there was one cosmology that I adopted from that. I live it as a metaphor, but the idea here is that the great force of life, which is God, or the infinite to them, Hatun is its name, is an egg, but it's of infinite size, so it's not bounded really, but nevertheless, this feminine image of an egg. And inside that egg is Lake Wiracocha, from which the great god Atahualpa arose. Lake Wiracocha is the collective unconscious. It's the lake of wisdom, or the Akashic records. Everything that's ever happened in the mind of God, so to speak, is there. And there's concentric eggs within concentric eggs. But there's a chant that goes with this so that you can actually live and feel the mythology. And it goes like this. Hatun, Wiracocha, Bajamama, Ashpamama, Tukuishunguan Kuyanimi. So inside Hatun is Lake Wiracocha. Inside the egg of Lake Wiracocha is the leg of Pachamama. That's Mother Nature. Stretches throughout the whole cosmos, okay? Mm-hmm. Within that is Ashpamama, which is our particular piece, planet Earth, Gaia, if you will. It's Ashpamama. And then there's you, there's me, and so on. Mm-hmm. So eggs within eggs within eggs. And there are variations on this chant, but they all really pretty much express the same mythology, the same cosmology. And then there's the concept, of a subconscious, an ego conscious, and a superconscious, mm-hmm. Or a lower self and a higher self with the ego personality in between. Well, they have that too. The Lakota have it with Wonia, Nagi, and Nagila. The Polynesians have it. The Quechua of Ecuador, the Atis Quechua, is called Hanakpacha, which means heaven, or the heavenly realm, but also the higher self. Kaipacha, which means the middle world, but also the ego personality. And Ukupacha, which is the subconscious depths, you know. And so the chant incorporates that too. So it's like, Tukui Hanak Pacha Kai Pacha Uku Pacha Tukui Shunguan Kui Animi Tukui Shunguan Kui Animi Tukui Shunguan Kui Animi. And it's entrancing, and I use it in my healing ceremonies. My apprentices know this stuff well. And there are many other chants, but it's all embodying the cosmology. And I really believe it, and yet I know it's a mythology too. Okay, just the way I believe certain poems are very revelatory of truth, you know. But if you listen to the Polynesian version or the Lakota version, they're going to have different words, they're going to have different images that go with it. But there's this underlying archetypal commonality that you can feel, this structure of reality that's been discovered across cultures. You know?
Right.
So in the Polynesian version, and we have it also in Quechua, the psychology gets richer, okay? In Polynesian, like Hawaii, for example, you have Omakua, which is the higher self or oversoul. Now, this thing is much bigger than Jung's archetypal self, okay? It's your God, and it's on an adventure across eternity, okay? And it creates out of itself a little seed, an acorn, a holograph of itself, and makes that your higher self for this life. Okay? So then that, you have your mother's energy and ancestry, you have your father's energy and ancestry. You know, the gametes meet, then the egg, and as this mythology has it, when you draw your first breath, the Omakua, or higher self, descends. Now that is your daimon, your guardian angel, and what I call the archetype of you.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it has an irreplaceable, unique blueprint or pattern for you to express, to live throughout your life cycle.
Right.
To unfold that thing, you know. James Hillman, when he talks about the acorn, it's the same thing. But the acorn's packed with DNA, you know, so there's this structure to each individual soul, or spirit really, coming in, that you're meant to discover and to live. Yeah. So this kind of gives you an idea of my own mythology. But, you know, Robert Moore and I both were influenced by Alfred North Whitehead, this process philosopher,
Right.
whose ideas are rooted in quantum physics, really. He's a quantum philosopher, if you will. And in his vision of the divine, it's kind of like yang and yin. It has a conceptual, mental aspect, and it has a receptive, almost feminine feeling aspect. But every moment of your experience is felt. Every moment of the experience of any creature anywhere in the multiverse is felt, co-present with you. Okay, and it's preserved. That's like your akasha or collective unconscious that's being taken in, formed. And it lifts your experience up into what Whitehead called the primordial nature, the divine mind, and it contemplates possibilities. So it's like the creator of the archetypes, but also it has created your archetype, and each moment it is contemplating new possibilities that are seasonally relevant to your situation and offering them back. I call those invitations. So I've worked out this kind of a mythology for myself, you know, to replace the one I lost when I jettisoned my father's world. And also I like the Greek mythology. I draw from that. Hermes is very strong for me.
Yeah.
What I just shared with you is kind of a demonstration of Hermes kind of figure.
Right.
Because Hermes is moving, unlike any of the other gods in Greek mythology, in all three realms, the upper world, the lower world, or realm of Hades, and the middle world. He's bringing messages like an angel. He's offering guidance. He's shape-shifting and being a trickster. Times his shadow side, it creates mischief and what have you. And he doesn't want to be pinned down to a social role, a bed of Procrustes. Doesn't want to be stuck in any one box. It's always elbowing to get out. And I was that way, I mean, like from birth,
Yeah.
which is why my father and I didn't get on. So I own, from the Amerindian cultures, the mythologies I was given through my initiation. But as a white Western man, I feel I also have to honor Western culture.
Yeah.
And so I bring in the Greek mythology and also alchemy, which I like. And, Hermes plays a role in that. Mm-hmm. It's big. Hermes Trismegistus, for example. And then the philosophical traditions, such as Alfred North Whitehead. So I'm a bridge builder between cultures and also worldviews. And everybody has a different worldview, but building bridges. But I see that Jung did this too.
Yeah.
Jung put extreme importance on the imagination. So his way of doing soul recovery work, for example, was through the imagination. He had his famous moon lady, said she lived on the moon. Do you know that story?
No, I don't know that one. Mm-mm.
Okay, it's when Jung was in the Asylum Bergetseli in Zurich, he had this patient who had been in there for several years since she was a teenager, and she was catatonic. That was her diagnosis, catatonic schizophrenic. Jung went in, introduced himself, tried to meet her. She ignored him. But Jung did this every day for many months. He would just go and sit in silence. And one day, she said, I live on the moon. So there was a level of trust somehow established here.
Oh, yeah, I remember now. Okay, keep going, though, with the story, yeah.
And Jung says, tell me about the moon. And she laid out this whole mythology she was living. She was sexually molested by a brother's friend or something, and she had retreated to the moon where she had a place of great importance. She lived in a tower. All the rest of the women on the moon, with their children, lived below the surface. And she was like a sentinel or a guardian living in this tower to warn people should the demon lover come.
Right.
A la the sexual perpetrator. So she could warn them, Right. And Jung said, so now you know. You have to come back. She says, why? He says, because you've already let me in. You've communicated with another human. And she didn't like that, but in fact, she recognized that was true. She had let him in. Now, there's more going on than imagination. Jung's persistence in sitting with her, his belief that relationship was possible. But I believe Jung underplayed the role of feeling. I think he was a man of great feeling. And the imagination kind of grows out of the depths of feeling.
Yeah, that was part of his time too, though, right?
Yeah.
Men and the feeling state were still more disconnected than they are today.
Yeah, right. But I think it was very big in Jung.
Oh, for sure. That was, for sure. But still, even within it, even in his, when we look back to his relationships and stuff, we still see that kind of patriarchal kind of thing going
That's
on.
right.
Still, of course.
Yeah. So, I've tried to read the Red Book through twice. I've got it all marked up. I've got the big coffee table book, but I've also got the little book. It's almost like a little Bible, and that one's, I've marked the heck out of that up. And I've made a stab at trying to read it cover to cover. It was just impossible for me. My friend Robert Moss did it. I don't know how he did it, because I thought I was going to go crazy. The feeling that was stirred in me was so intense.
Wow.
Moss did throw the book across the room when Jung got into that visualization eating somebody's liver, you know. But
See, we haven't read it. We've looked through we've looked through it and looked at the images, but we haven't read it yet.
oh my God! So it begins with Jung. He's devastated because Freud has chopped his cojones off. You know, he's blacklisted from psychoanalysis, which was basically depth psychology in Europe at that time.
Right.
And he was shunned, you know, as a charlatan. He was embarrassed before the world, and he got very depressed. So he starts out, "My soul, where are you?" He called out to the spirit of the depths. And he talked about the spirit of the times, being like, right now we're dealing with our own time, but he was dealing with his time, you know, and what's happening in the collective consciousness and unconscious of the spirit of his time. But he was going deeper than that to the spirit of the depths, and that's where his first dialogues come from. His first acts of active imagination are coming out through his own groaning and the feeling like he's lost his soul, that's trying to get it back. And so if you can start with that and realize this man is really trying to save himself, you know, he's desperate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe we could actually use that as the bridge into the shadow subject, because that's where he goes.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, that book, in my opinion, this is an oversimplification, but half of it is a confrontation with the shadow, and can be horrendous. Parts of it horrendous to read. Because he dares to think the unthinkable. He dares to confess what most of us won't confess with great courage. But then, the other half of it is more of these transcendent figures, like heavenly figures. I mean, first, they're the biblical figures, you know, of Elijah and Salome. You know, she's the girl that beheaded John the Baptist, but in this story that Jung was living, she is like a seer, you know, and they morph into Philemon, you know, who's kind of a Gnostic Merlin, a magician, you know. But the education he gets in the second half of that book, his relationship with Merlin, is an upper world spiritual input. You know, he's been for years down in the shadows, you know, collective as well as personal, you know. That was confusing for him because World War I was about to outbreak when he started in on that, you know, and he was seeing rivers of blood, you know, and horrific images, and he thought he was going mad. Right. And then one day he sees the headlines and he realizes, in his own sensitivity, he was reading the whole shadow upheaval of Europe, you know, was going on. So you have, like William Blake, this kind of mixture of heaven and hell going on in Jung. But by the end of it all, he has this great Liverpool dream where it's the city of life, you know, Liverpool, the pool of life. And there's a magnolia tree in the center with gold and light coming up and 4 roads leading in surrounded by a moat. And he came back from that and he goes, that's it. You can't get beyond the center. The center point is the thing. And of course, it's the axis mundi and the opening for the voice, the directing voice of the spirit or the daimon that guides your life. And it's circularity, you know, is symbolic of embracing all of you, you know, all the content.
And this is right, and this is where all of his interest in mandalas and all of that comes from.
Yeah, after that point, he starts painting them every day for a couple more years, up to 1918. Whereas he finished the visions in 1916, if I'm not mistaken. But he continued painting the mandalas daily because he was serving as a military I forget what it's called, but in Switzerland you have to do this military duty.
Yeah.
And there was a world war going on, and so he was in some camp, some type of commandant. And so to center himself and to see what his psyche was up to, he was drawing and painting these beautiful mandalas. You know, so he did that for a while. But I was talking about myths. Jung's myth formed out of this. And, you know, he had this number 1 and number 2 personality he talks about in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And the number 1 is the one that gets the education as a medical doctor and, you know, has a career. It's like the ego personality.
Right.
But the number 2, that's his archetype.
Right.
And that's what this whole descent, this Nekia into the underworld was about. And Jung comes out of that with the whole mythology. And he produces the 7 Sermons of the Dead, Septem ad Sermos ad Mortuum, 7 Sermons of the Dead, out of a synchronistic event that happened in his house where the doorbell was ringing, but nobody was there, you know. But the energy he was feeling in his body was tremendous, and so he just sat down and kind of did an act of imagination, and it just came through him. And he lays out his entire psychology, beginning with the Godhead and the formless, the void, you know. And everything is there that Jung turned into books. So that was the conclusion of his Nekia. Okay. And the 7 Sermons is his mythology, you know. And it's not very long. I recommend reading it.
Let me write down a note on that so I can find that later. 7 Sermons. So, Mikkal, for whatever reason, when Melissa and I got together 4 years ago, in a similar way, we downloaded all this material. And through conversations and dreams and epiphanies
and synchronicities.
And it shows up in that book, Shadow Tech. And part of that work is to try to define this domain of the shadow. And so one of the things that was part of that was, well, if you're going to define the shadow, you have to define the psyche. And so that's been part of that kind of investigation. And it appears to me that the shadow is not, well, here's a simplified way. Do you remember those pictures, those circular pictures? Remember the pictures that Freud drew of the psyche and had like a circle inside a circle? He said, here's the ego, here's the unconscious, here's the, out here's the superconscious, and in there's the shadow, and circles within circles. And Jung had some drawings like that. Jung had one of some strata of the earth, different strata. And I had been looking at biology, just for different reasons over the years and stuff, and it dawned on me that we could use this map of the cell, the eukaryotic cell, which is again that same circular mandala, that same circular archetype, and if you could see that the ego is sort of the field around the membrane that mediates the external culture from the internal psyche. And the ego field only goes so far into the unconscious. And then at that point, it goes all into the unconscious. And that shadow material could be, in this model, defined as any energy that should be metabolized up through the ego, out of the membrane, out into the society, into the persona, out into the society. It should come up and out, but it can't for whatever reason. So it's trapped energy because not all energy has to come out of the unconscious and make its way into your conscious mind and get into the world. But the stuff that should for your development, you could see that as shadow material. And if you define the shadow that way, it kind of takes it away from this idea that it's a domain, like there's a cave in there, like there's like a door or a closet, and somewhere in your psychology there's a room where all dirty, nasty, ugly, evil things are kept. It's not like that. It's all kinds of destructive energy that's all throughout the whole circuitry of your psyche that should make its way into use, but can't, and is trapped and blocked or misguided or whatever.
Right, and usually it's trapped by the wounds. It's blocked, how I see it. It's just blocked energy. Usually it's either intergenerational trauma or trauma that's been passed on by your parents.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's blocked. It becomes a wound, a festering wound, so that this energy cannot be moved.
Yeah, it's like a tumor or something like that. You could see it like that. So we could come up with different kinds of models to try to put our mind around this. But I just wanted to tell you that, and then ask you to maybe define the shadow in Jungian terms, and then maybe sort of redefine it as you see it, because through all these years of shamanic studies, because those guys are different probably from indigenous people to people, but generally they have a way of seeing these things, maybe as demonic forces or other things. Maybe you could just take that, put that into your pipe, smoke it, and then output something that you think is a good comment to output.
Yeah. Okay. First, let me just state in brief the classic Jungian view. That the shadow is the backside of the persona, which is the front side of the ego.
Right.
So it's like face mask. That's your persona. And what it doesn't include is in the background. So both these concepts, persona and shadow, are the outer shell of the ego.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you disidentify with, for whatever reason, is not in your persona, it's in your shadow. What you choose and want the world to think you are, you project that into your persona. So,
so that's pretty narrow definition right there. That's the classic Jungian definition.
That's just classic Jungian. But there are contents there that are not really bad. They can be creative. They can be inspired. They can be instinctual. They can be filled with life. But because of cultural relativity and your parental biases and their mythology, they say, no, nice boy, don't be a bad boy, or
right.
Nice girl, don't be a bad girl. And so you start forming, you start pushing stuff back. So it's recognized that shadow is composed of a lot of material like that that's actually natural and healthy if it's given appropriate expression. Okay.
Right.
And Jungians also know there are traumatic parts, pathogenic complexes that are in the shadow, that pain body stuff.
Right.
And, Jung's taken up the subject of karma too, trying to look at it from that angle, what Stan Grof calls the coex systems. And these patterns can cross lifetimes.
Right.
Right. And they're not genetic. They're not, you could have had a past life.
They're not genetic, because we see this, a lot of these pathogenic complexes in our parents.
And yeah.
So you got different kinds of ancestry here. Okay, so you've got the bloodlines of your parents, coming through the gametes that unite. You also have etheric energy of your parents that's going in and influencing you. But if we go back to the concept of the Omakua, or the higher divinity that you are, every past life that you've had lives in that lake of wisdom. It's not just a memory, it's alive, and it's an ancestor. So that's the third line of ancestry that's entering in. And those past lives can come in as guides, as sources of guidance and inspiration, even confront you or try to pull you back on your path. So you can have ancestry that's not genetic.
Would you add to those guides that can pull you back onto your path just the opposite version, destructive guides, demons, etc., that would interject their influence into life?
Not in Omakua, but
Okay.
there are such entities, and the question is, what are they? And there's a lot of answers that all could be right. You know, so that's when we get to possession in a minute. You know,
Yeah.
we'll take a look at that, because I know Melissa's interested in that. But let me say that for me, you know, I'm a healer. You know, a psychologist, but a shamanic healer of nearly half a century experience now, and I've worked all over the world. You know, and I've worked with, done ceremony with, taught alongside more than 150 shamans from 85 cultures. You know, I've been in the jungles, I've been in the mountains, I've been in the huts. I've learned from the best. You know, and learned from diversity of ways to do things too, and ways to perceive. You know? And this whole thing of the pain body,
Yeah.
you know, the shaman is working with that all the time. The psychotherapist or the psychoanalyst hopefully would work with it, you know. But the difference is the shaman, or the psycho-shaman in my case, is going to speak the language of the psyche, speak the language of the unconscious. And this may be chant, and it may be ritual, it may be mythological. It's definitely cosmological at times, okay? And it's complex out there or in there. And I have seen things that in Western culture, particularly in American version of Western culture, people would be quick to reduce that to some type of, that's a traumata, or that's a complex, or that's an ego state, this sort of thing.
Yeah, I would tend to try to do that in order to map it out.
You should always keep your skeptic, you know. So you should do your best to fit it in the best psychological models, but keep an open mind at the same time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, you know, let's just, this is a good place to move into possession, because it's part of this shadow dynamics. Okay, everybody's getting possessed right now.
Yeah, please do. But as you move into this concept of possession, can you also merge the concepts of the shadow as a Jungian understanding and this idea of the pain body that maybe not everybody that will listen to this knows, Eckhart Tolle's term, and how is the pain body part of the shadow, or is it, or how do you parse
it is. It is a big part of the shadow, the major part of the shadow. Because what I've seen is, I've looked evil in the face. Somewhere along the way, there's been pain, even for entities that have not incarnated, okay? And it's coming out of terrible woundedness and hatred, sometimes hatred at God for what they have been through, you know? And I saw this clearly. For example, I saw the handiwork of a mass murderer up close, like nobody has ever seen it, you know?
Wow.
And my question was, what would make a person do such a thing?
Yeah.
He had butchered a bunch of women and done it artfully and posted his photos on the internet so that other mass murderers could, or such murderers could admire each other's work, this sort of thing. So it was these guys feeding each other, and I could smell the hatred in it. But what caused that hatred? Yeah. So I did a lot of ayahuasca and went in and looked at that, and I could see very clearly the wounds, the trauma, really, and the response is so profound. It is hatred at the ground of being for even existing.
Whoa.
You know.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So this is what Jung would have called archetypal evil. Robert Moore certainly would have called it that. And that's different from the personal shadow.
Yeah, existential hatred.
Yeah.
It's yeah, because there's no logic to that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a way to put it. So that's out there. And, there's also the kind of evil that's fear-based, scarcity-based.
Yep.
Let's get all for myself and my family, screw everybody else. I'm the only one that matters.
Right.
Yeah, and we got a lot of that going on right now.
Yeah, that's basic kind of reptilian kind of the needs of an organism.
And the effects of all this on the pain body, or you might say the memory that lives on deep in the psyche, is also traumatic. The memory of your ancestors is part of the pain body.
Yeah.
Even the memory of your past lives, what you haven't digested, say karmically, is part of your pain body. And then the genetics, and to be born, like I had a friend born in India, and the India and the Pakistanis don't get on. There's lots of hatred, and I could see this guy's past lives, and I could see this went back generations and generations as I was working with him. And he said when he was a small child, he was taught hatred, and that he must hate the Pakistanis.
Interesting.
And I could see how this has gone in his family. It's just like the fundamentalist religion that I learned. It's just passed on as coding. So that's in there. And that's a fear-based thing, too.
It's
xenophobia.
coding. Do you say that the coding it's coding that manifests itself in physiological chemical recipes in the body and keeps repeating? Would you say that it's in the DNA, or do you say that it's being transmitted to a field other than that?
Epigenes.
Okay, right. Got you. It's an epigenetic phenomenon, right?
Well, that's the frame I'd put on it with the current state of science.
Yeah.
On the genetic things.
Okay.
That's something that what you learn and what you experience as a child, growing up, can be so powerful that your children and your children's children can have that same experience.
And so if the goal, I don't want to take you too far off because I know you want to go into possession, but really quick, if one of the goals of doing shadow work is to get into that epigenetic trauma or the programming that holds the states of that trauma, to get into that material that has been passed on generation after generation. Traditional psychotherapy can try to do it. You can use we can talk about all kinds of methods to do that or whatever, but in our experience, because we're trying to access some of that material, and it's extremely hard we're circumscribing it, but to actually get into it and change the code. And this is something that came from Melissa. Show him your tattoo. There is a you have to lean over maybe because we're having some video issues, but.
So yeah, it's very abstract, but it's DNA, because when I was diagnosed with cancer, my intuition said that I would have to go into my DNA itself to fully heal myself, even though I turned the cancer around with alternative medicine and all that. But it's only through this deeper work that we've been doing that I've understood how deep that is, that to actually go in there and transmute the actual code, these destructive codes, or the epigenetic destructive codes that are being passed on, that seems to be where it's very challenging. And I haven't figured out the key to how to do that, how to recode, to actually transmute these codes.
Yeah, there's a kind of a lineage that's been working on this. It starts with Timothy Leary, and he recognized you had to be in a discrete altered state to reprogram, and he successfully did this, with quite a few prison inmates that were getting ready to be released, so they could be tracked after their release, their development. And he used LSD to reach these discrete states, and to have them completely transform their lives, which in fact they did.
And we know about John Lilly's work too, which is in that lineage, right?
Yeah. Both these guys influenced me. I have a 10-channel model that I developed because of their work, because I wanted to know exactly what state somebody was in. And, I see people come to me from all over the world. They're in all kinds of hell. And I want to know exactly where they are and how to meet them there. So I created my own map. I could have created 100 channels, but I created 10 because that was sufficient for me. I knew what I could pack into those so I could track where somebody was at. For example, if you are very mystically enlightened, but you were sexually abused as a child, and you have post-traumatic flashbacks, and let's say you can channel people, okay, because I've worked with people like this, okay, and then you get your post-traumatic stress triggered because entities, like you get in your car one day and there's somebody sitting in the seat next to you.
Yep.
You freak out, okay. So that person is stuck in what I call channel 5. This is a channel where the dead can be found. It's a frequency. If you know how to really train your brainwaves into that region of theta, you can find that. And the thing is, what's going on in channel 5 is blocking channel 10, an integrated non-dual living of channel 9 in life.
Yeah.
To be able to find that and then work at that level. But reprogramming really happens at channel 9. That's the I am place.
Okay. Keep going.
And you've got to be in that place, not just think it, not just sense it. You've got to be in God consciousness. And that requires a powerful holotropic state to be in. But once you're there, you can look at anything. And you can do it without fear. Okay. And so you can go into that DNA, you can go into anything that's a trauma, and work with it very compassionately. I have people in Channel 9 record messages to themselves that they can listen to the next day when they're back in Channel 1, everyday, ordinary reality. So they can hear from their own higher consciousness the messages they were giving to themselves. I support this with hemisync music because we record it so that the music also drives the states. I can share this little 10-channel model with you.
Oh, that'd be nice.
So that very much connects to my own process, because I have used psychedelics, and every time I'm in that state, I'm at channel 9, and it's it's the integration of that back into channel 1, and then it seems like it's a process, because I got very clearly that to truly heal, you have to have conscious relationship with as far as the physiology, with every cell in your body is conscious relationship. And I don't know why it is, but that's where I've had blockages, is how to get, every time I can get to channel 9 very easily, but it's these programs in channel 1 or wherever they are seem to be
they come right back,
blocking the wisdom that's coming through.
Yeah. So what I have people do is wear a really good headset. Okay, the best you can afford.
Okay.
Okay, because sound quality is everything. You know, my friend Byron Metcalf has some great music. He started out Hemisync. Now he's got his own thing he's involved, but it drives both hemispheres so that they're in sync. You know, hemisphere sync.
Right.
Okay. And can pull you into channel 9. Then you can sustain a long-term relationship with this programming state.
Oh.
And then you listen to it every day for like 3 months. First thing when you get out of bed. And I recommend actually listen to it before you go to bed. Listen to it first thing when you get up before you get out of bed. And then if you can do a morning yoga or meditation, put the headphones on. The quality of the sound is important.
Yeah,
But
I got a $400 pair of headphones, so I got that part taken care of. But what is the actual program material that you're playing through the headphones?
yeah, hold on a second now.
Okay.
So Byron, he's just really working this area. This is called Dream Tracker, which is pretty good, but Intention I recommend for this. Okay. And of course, his Shaman's Heart series is really good too. But Intention and Dream Tracker I recommend for this. And when you record for yourself, because you actually send the programming in language, okay, you direct it in. You can visualize it as you're doing too. But have this music in the background, not so loud that you can't hear your voice. You want to be sure to hear your messages. And you have to record when you're in channel 9.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you're doing this in a normal waking state, not in a holotropic state or anything.
You're listening in a normal state, but
Yeah.
you have to get into channel 9, which for most people means they really have to alter their consciousness to get there.
Yeah, I don't need much, but
You mean
Yeah, and this
so the
music-
music itself is not getting you? How do you get to
Yeah,
channel
it can.
9?
It can get me there, you know. It can be more powerful if you have psilocybin,
Yeah.
you know, or LSD or something. But if you know how to get there already, which I do, I don't need that to get there, you know. The headphones is all you'll need with that kind of music. Because this music is meant to drive these altered states.
great.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, we'll check that one out. I mean, I you know, here's the thing is that of course I've come across that technology and all of that, but there's a lot of experimentation that's out there in these healing modalities. A lot of it is garbage, and so you know you're turning us on to something that you're verifying works. So that's great.
Yes, this has to be done like religious practice.
I see.
You know, so it's a shamanic healer. You know, I emphasize the importance of sacred ceremony. You know, you need your altar. You need your daily practice, what you can call the symbolic life.
I see.
You've got to be connecting to Source. Don't even try to heal yourself until you're connected to Source.
Well, so this is so. Check this out, then, Mikkal. Is that okay? Melissa and I both are we're constantly being in touch with our intuition and being a clear channel for unconscious energy, and always trying to keep that open as much as possible. Just I don't know if it's the is what's always going on with us. But we don't have at this point right now, a daily ritual. We don't have a ritual practice in our lives right now. And we feel good enough, whole enough, because we have this continual relationship that's going on all the time. We feel like we're living a spiritual life 24/7, but we don't have that disciplined ritual aspect.
Yeah. So what I'm talking about is code. And the code you need passes through the ritual. It's in the imagery, it's in the intention that you put into the imagery, the tangible things. Okay, so you want to teach the conscious mind to speak the language of the unconscious, because it is not interested in your ideas. It's not interested in your concepts.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't speak that. It's like speaking Japanese to somebody that only speaks English. It doesn't mean it. Yeah. So you'll find this in Jung, but this is also a big shamanic principle. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take, because I have this one all the time. Women come to me in their 50s or 60s because they had abortions for whatever reason when they were younger. Okay, now as they're getting older, they're getting more spiritual. They feel like, they've got to take responsibility for what happened. They're feeling guilty, regret, all this sort of thing. And I can act as a kind of a channel in that and facilitate conversations, which can be very healing. But let me suggest how a shamanic ritual can help. Okay. Most women, they commit an abortion, the boyfriend is not with them.
Right.
They go in there alone.
Yeah.
That's trauma in itself.
Yeah.
And if you know what happens in there, it's not pretty. And the situation can be abusive because often the arrogance of the doctors doing the abortions too. So a ritual that takes this into account, and if possible, the boyfriend can be a part of it, but usually they're long gone, So you get a best friend or something to accompany you. You get a fruit, like a big grapefruit or something, okay? If there are multiple abortions, you get multiple fruits, okay? You put them on your belly, you wrap yourself tight like a linen sheet, okay? You put a black stone in your mouth, and in your partner's mouth you put a cherry red piece of candy. You go outside and you dig a grave, okay? Your partner helps you cut open the sheet and put these babies in the ground. Then you spit out the black stone that symbolizes your despair, your shame, whatever. You put that in the ground too. Into this grave you dug with your own hands. And then your partner slips from her mouth into yours the cherry red sweetness. Then you drop some seeds perhaps, or a sapling into the hole, and with your hands you bury it up. Now, if this is a lover you're doing the ceremony with, then go home and make love. And if it's a friend, pick a favorite restaurant or go have a cappuccino together. In other words, finesse it with celebration.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This speaks the language of the deep psyche. Jungians could have a field day with all the symbols in that, but it's not meant to be interpreted.
Yeah. So you're saying, and Robert Moore said this over and over again as well. That despite so here I am here, and Melissa has a much easier job of taking ritual seriously and living through the ritual and allowing the ritual to enter her belief system. I have a harder time with that, and that's where we are, societally, and so what do you say about this conflict, this conscious conflict between the unconscious that knows, literally, probably, maybe back to our monkey heritage, millions, maybe years of ritual, hundreds of thousands at least years of ritual, and it knows that, and then this modern, postmodern conscious mind, scientific mind that says, no, that's bullshit, and there's that conflict going on.
Yes, right. So the mind has to be taught how to speak the language of the soul. Okay, our minds have gotten alienated. We've put too much importance on our concepts and beliefs. The mind is a magnificent thing, but it should be a servant of the heart and not its dictator.
Right.
And these rituals are rooted in instinct, you know, as are all rituals, really. And Whitehead said that, you know, you can see when certain animals have leisure, they start to play. And if you watch, there's a kind of a ritual, a form to it that they go through.
Right.
And human ritual is an expression of that animal type of play. And then later, the mythology, you know, the imagination opens up and carries it forward more. And then the theologians come along and parlay it, or the philosophers, into doctrines, you know. And then the scientists come along and abstract it and reduce it to particles and what have you, you know. So there's a level of an estrangement way up here, you know. But you can have all that, but don't forget the roots, you know. Don't forget the source from which that stuff is springing. So you can build a bridge between your conceptual mind and its beauty and power and what other parts of you need. You know, the animal has needs different from the intellect. And the soul of that animal has needs that are different from the intellect. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it makes total sense, and at some point you have to see, as you speak this language, you know, the analyzing mind wants to say, okay, I can believe that, but give me a definition of the soul. And okay, well, I can believe that, but give me a definition of this, and give me a definition of this. And it wants a clear ideology, methodology, circuitry to be able to trace all of these things before it feels comfortable letting go. It's a control-freaking magician mind that wants to know all this before I'm going to let go and let, you know, let these unconscious illogical processes work. I want to have a clear map of it so I can let go. But of course,
no.
That never happens.
Okay, so you need to unblend from your intellect.
Yeah.
Okay, because you're possessed in that case by the intellect.
Yes.
So it wants the ideas. It wants the logic.
Right.
Like a dog wants to chew on the bone, as Eckhart Tolle would say.
Yeah.
Okay. It has its own hunger. You are not that.
Right.
You are its owner. Okay. Just, you see me moving my hand in my fingers. I do so at will, and it obeys me because I say so.
Right.
And it is the same way with my mind. You can gain that kind of control.
Right.
So that you lead the mind rather than the other way around. Mind has a job to do. But science is interesting, concepts, philosophy, I love all that stuff, but you have to realize they are imagined from the mind itself, which is an outgrowth of the unconscious, and it's just versions. Just reality machine making realities.
Yes.
Okay. And what you want is a belief system that supports your whole being and doesn't violate it. It doesn't have to be true. It has to bear fruit. So it needs to increase your sense of meaning, increase your sense of love, increase your depth of feeling and joy, your sense of purpose. If it's giving fruit like that, if other people are benefiting, then that's pragmatically true. Follow me?
Right.
Oh, I follow you completely, and I don't fall into the far end of the of that logical control freaking need, but it's there enough to where, you know, I bring it up to show you that there's that issue, that blockage.
Yeah. So if you practice disentangling or disidentifying from it, then you have more freedom, and you can choose. Today, let's try out Dionysus.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay, because the intellectual pattern you're describing is more characterized by Apollo.
Right.
Apollo.
Right.
So a little vacation from Apollo. Let's experience life or look at something through the lens of Dionysus. You know.
Now, there's a program in me that's blocking Dionysus. And
Yeah,
if
sure.
you look at Robert Moore's model, the 4 archetypes, right? It's occurred to me that the warrior, as it rises up, naturally depresses the lover, and as the lover rises up, it naturally depresses the warrior, and so that's one of these things that's happening.
Yeah. Let me say, beautiful and elegant as the Moorish model is, keep yourself open to other mythological models. Greek mythology offers you a much richer, so you have more notes to play. Even Bob Moore knew this. He used to tell me, he says, you don't want to just play one note on the piano, one chord. You want the whole 88 keys, So even he was not a true believer in his 4 archetypes, Okay, he was doing something for masculine psychology and trying to pare it down so it can be communicated and we can learn from it. But in fact, his mind was much richer than that,
Oh yeah.
So
do we want to? No, go ahead. Go right ahead.
The more mythological images you have, okay, it's like more keys on the keyboard to explore and express. So. But let me move on to possession.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Because that would be one type of possession. Okay, it's possession of the intellect. It's taking up too much space. And they're instinctual possessions. Urges, impulses, like people with attention deficit disorder. They're not necessarily doing things because they want to. It's just they're compulsive. And they do them. They're restless and they distracting.
So you could call neuroses, pathologies, complexes could also be called possessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Jung thought so. And there's archetypal possession. So that's more like where you're overly identified with the warrior, let's say, or the magician or whatever. Right. And you don't allow any of the other archetypal possibilities to have a place in your life.
Right.
So you get a bit monotone and boring after a while. Even you can get bored with yourself if you're possessed by an archetype, And some of them, you can be quite psychotic, like the archetype of the savior or something like that. There's something like that going on. These people standing on the street corners trying to convert you and so on. That's beyond complex. They've identified now with the sacred, but in a psychotic, ungrounded way, So there's archetypal possession, complex possession. Traumatized parts can possess you. Now, okay, we all have complexes. We all have part selves or subpersonalities.
Right.
The only ones that are a problem are the ones that are overburdened by trauma.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. And those make up the pain body.
Yeah.
Your personal aspect of it.
Okay.
And those need healing. But they need your higher self. They need your consciousness to be established. Your connection with the sacred has to be there, or there's no way the most hidden, hurting parts are going to let you near them.
Channel 9?
Yeah, that's right. Because without that, the protectors, the managers, and the firefighters are going to come in and distract and make it look like everything's okay, Jack, but it really isn't.
And
the defense system.
And you're sure about this, right? That it takes Channel 9 to be able to, that higher state, to be able to go into those subparts to the pain body.
Yeah, but what you can say if you're working with somebody is say, just get in your truth self. It can help to meditate, it can help to pray, but you'll know when you're in it because you're unblended with these other parts.
Right.
If you're feeling terribly afraid and you feeling like you want to run away or something like that, well, that's not your truth self. That's a part.
Yep.
Okay, it's overburdened. Parts should have a fuller range of perspectives and emotions, but when they're traumatized, they only have one. They get reduced to one.
Yeah.
And one might be a protecting kind of attitude, another might be a fearful thing, another might be enraged. But whatever that part under the burden of trauma locked onto, it suppresses all the other emotions around it. So to be able to get to that and to witness it with love and compassion, you have to be connected to the sacred. Your true self or your higher self has to be coming through.
Okay.
Otherwise, it won't let you touch it. Okay. This is why shamanism has a lot to teach psychotherapy, self-care. Okay, because this is its magic, knowing how to get in there, knowing the language of the codes, which is all clothed in mythology and what have you, and ritual. But
right.
Yeah. So then, a lot of people that come into therapy, they have that kind of stuff, so they're possessed by that. Some people are possessed by what other people think.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
The average person is living by the slots that society tells them to live by the rules. They want what everybody else wants. They eat what everybody else eats. And they judge themselves when they're strange. So that's the beta procrustes, and this can ruin a life. You can maybe get rich and successful, even famous, but there's no real life in it. It's all a sham.
Oh yeah.
Okay, because you're just pleasing.
Right. I see it out there, and that's where the average population is, and can't imagine living that way. But that's where we're at.
So that's kind of an outward kind of possession by the collective. Just be average, just be normal, be like everybody else. And that's a fear-based strategy. But the neurotic is trying to bust out of that and can't do it.
Right, that's me.
Okay, because there's somewhere in the mind, there's a judge saying you can't do that.
Right.
You shouldn't do that, okay? And so you're caught in the conflict between the impulse to liberate, to individuate, or to create, and the impulse that says you shouldn't be doing that. Okay, so then let's say the creative artist, the person that has liberated from that neurotic strangulation, is then really able to do it, really flying with it. Okay. Right. So anyway, that being caught in the middle is a kind of possession. Something has you.
Yep.
Okay. So for the most part, these are the kind of possessions you see in a psychotherapy practice, and you might call them addictions, or you can come up with some other name. It's a problem. You're stuck.
Yep.
Okay. There's nothing supernatural or transpersonal in particular about those states. Okay. But in indigenous cultures, those would be viewed as forms of spiritual possession.
Right.
And so there'd be rituals for that to help liberate you. And some of those rituals can really help us psychologically. But then, say people with multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder, there can be what's called a noxious alter. And a noxious alter can be suicidal, homicidal, can claim to be the devil, and generally it's composed of a lot of rage that's turned against the self system, and it's personifying it. So it's operating quite autonomously, and it can respond to psychotherapy if the therapist is resourceful enough and knows how to work with it. But depending on how severe it is, how dangerous it is, it may only respond to something like ritual exorcism or shamanic depossession. So that's a part of the self system trauma has been so acute, it has created this pocket of rage and self-hatred that can be dangerous to oneself or to others. Okay.
And this rage and self-hatred, if it doesn't make its way into highly destructive behavior, can make its way into the body, be displaced through the body, and you can come up with all kinds of psychosomatic illnesses or pains and all that kind of stuff. Lower back pain that persists for decades, and right? Is that true?
Right. But in working with dissociative disorders, they present themselves as entities, So they want you to believe that they're a completely separate person or being, So then, if you're going to be empathic, you've got to interlock with them on that level, and work with them. And sometimes you can do a mind meld or blend where you can put them together with other parts of the self. But usually, if you try to change these parts that way, they resist. They don't want to die like that.
That's right.
But now there's a whole nother level. So I occasionally do ritual exorcism, and I occasionally happens in the breath work, happens a lot in Europe, doesn't happen that much in the States, happens in South America. So where you have especially malignant entities that profess hatred of God or claim to be a ghost, who was murdered or something like that, and they want to punish all men or all women, whatever, whoever hurt them. They're coming through, and in fact can do that, can be homicidal, this sort of thing.
Right.
You get some of that going in these butchers, these rapists and butcher women and this sort of thing. Okay, it's a spiritual disease at this point. Okay. And if you grew up in Haiti, for example, you have benevolent possessions, but you have possessions by ghosts, and those can be life-threatening. Okay, so because of me and what I do, depth psychologist, clinical psychologist, medical anthropologist, shamanic teacher, working internationally, you better bet that people with those kind of problems are hungry to find people like me.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, in most cases, I'll tell you what I've experienced, because few psychologists would be willing to admit this or talk about this or even be prepared to do it. But, so, in one case, a guy is caught in a past life, and he's a Frenchman. He's an Amerindian in the past life. This is very possible because the French and the Algonquins and Lakota, French were butchering them, and some type of karmic, turnaround, payback, with Frenchmen now in Lakota bodies and Lakotas now in French bodies is possible. So I've seen a lot of that kind of phenomenon. Don't know if it's true or not, but the phenomenon itself is real.
Okay.
So this guy is on the floor. His eyes are white. They're rolled up. Okay. And nobody's been able to help him. And I'm called in, and I get down to his ear on the floor. His name is Thierry. I said, Thierry, where are you? Like that. And he says, I'm fighting. I'm being killed. He's got me pinned down. I said, who? Where? He says, it's Lakota warrior. He's trying to kill me. He's got me pinned down. I can't come back. And I said, yes, you can. I'm getting my pipe now. And I went and got I have a prayer pipe, And I loaded that thing, did the ceremony for it, drew a breath, turned it around, brought it down to his mouth. And I said, smoke the pipe now. And he took it and he smoked it. His eyes roll back, and he starts to cry and he comes back. Right. Now you could call that a soul recovery, but he was actually possessed by this entity, whatever it was in this past life, coming back. Okay. Another guy, a Muslim.
Well, how does that carry on from there? What is his experience after this occasion in terms of this entity? Does he feel relief from this in the future, or as this goes on in his life?
Yes, he does. In fact, he's inordinately interested in Lakota culture, and he's reading up on that, and he's buying Lakota things. And so he's working on a framework of meaning for this. Okay. Another guy, and this is only one time because I've banned him from my workshops until he gets some individual work. But this was 3 months ago in France. He came from Paris to my workshop. I'm near Geneva, but I'm in the east of France. And there's a whole medical form you have to fill out, and there's a psychiatric section, and write down the medications. And I tried to screen for as much kind of probable contraindications as possible. Know what I'm getting into, okay. But none of that fit this guy. I had to change my medical form after him, okay.
Wow.
Young, I'd say 30 or younger now, this man. Little guy. He goes through 3 of the 4 days of the workshop. Everything's just fine. And finally, it's like a breathwork session. I have to leave the room to go pee. You know, it happens, right? So
Of course.
I come back and, you know, I've got 45 people in the room. They're all stopped. I hear screaming outside in the hallway. And most of my healers have gone outside and are working with this guy who is screaming, and his eyes are also rolled up white. Okay. But I've got a real team of good healers. You know, they're really on it. And I said, okay. So I went back in to be with the people in the main lodge. You know, we're all sitting there, and I said, well, this is going on for a long time, maybe 30 minutes. It went on for 3 hours.
Whoa.
I said, sooner or later, because I know now they don't know what to do, they're going to come get me and ask me to help. And I said, I'm going to bring the guy out. And they said, how are you going to do that? I said, if I have to shoot ice water up his asshole, I'm going to bring him back. No. But notice my attitude when I say that, see?
Oh, yeah.
You may not stay in that state.
Warrior.
And I'm going to, yeah, that's right. So it finally happens, you know. My assistant comes in and she goes, okay, we really need you. Nobody knows what to do. And we're afraid he's going to die, you know, or we've got to call a hospital. We're going to have problems with the police, you know, because what are you doing here, you know? I said, okay, get me a plate of raw meat, get me a turkey baster from the kitchen, fill it with ice cold water, turn the shower on, just the cold water. I want it as cold as possible. And when you have all that ready, let me know. Okay. So by this time, they had carried him to a bed in one of the dormitory rooms, you know, and there was a shower nearby, which was convenient.
Yep.
So when I got there, the guy's still on the bed screaming as loud as can be. And one of my assistants said he's actually possessed by a god in Egypt who won't release him. And I just said, bullshit, watch me release him, you know. And I got my face right down in that guy's face. He couldn't see me yet. But I said, it's Mikkal, I'm here. Get ready to come back. Because you will come back. I said, I'm going to put you in an ice cold shower if you don't come back this minute. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to put a turkey baster up your ass and squeeze ice water. His eyes popped back, and the look of terror on his face. And I knew I had him. And Luca, this young man who's my assistant, 7 foot tall, this guy, I said, pick him up and take him in the shower. When his clothes off, I want you to pin him to the wall. I want the cold water all over his body. Don't let him out no matter what he says. Okay?
Yep.
Until he's completely back. So took him into the shower, did that. I'm standing behind, so I'm watching and observing too. As Luca does this, you know. The guy's screaming, he's so goddamn cold! Stop, it's awful.
Right.
I said, it's not as awful as the state you were in, dude. I need you back, and I need you to stay back. Now, if you want out of the shower, you want the cold to stop, you're going to eat this raw meat now. And so he did. Okay. So he didn't eat it all. He just ate some of it. Okay.
Yeah.
But then he got sick and he needed to vomit.
Right.
So we took him to the toilet, let him go. And with that, he was back and he was relieved.
Right.
And he said to me, I've been on every continent, working with every exorcist I could find. Nobody has been able to help me. Thank you. Now, I'll tell you, I learned that way of working in the jungle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I've seen in the jungle is incredible, too. Okay. Now, that was a possession state. Okay. The claimed entity is some type of Egyptian god. Understand, he's a Muslim. I don't know what country he's from, but it's not too far off to think he might have ancestral links back there, you know. But in the jungle, I had this lady from the Caribbean who's a doctor, I won't say what kind, but she's very smart, okay? And she's there because she's possessed, okay? And I have the only exorcist in the area of Iquitos, that part. That's the ayahuasca capital of Peru. And, I worked with her for years, And so she does the exorcism. And she also had to use the water, But when this lady was possessed, it was an ayahuasca ceremony. When this lady was possessed, the whole place smelled like shit.
Ooh.
Which is not unusual with ayahuasca. People shit or they vomit. But in this case, it was so repulsive. And one entity would be cast out, and she'd calm down. And then this place would smell like shit again. And the entity would be cast out. So when we were done with our time in the jungle, I knew there was going to be more work, and she came here twice to my place at Crow's Nest for more healing, more exorcism. And I don't know how many we did, probably 20, something like that. But finally, I said, this gets old. She was born in a home for orphan children in the Caribbean, and there were all kinds of deaths that took place there. So it is possible that wandering about souls or something looking for a body. What I noticed in the exorcisms was that we were exorcising children, and they were scared, they were terrified, and they had to be reassured, that this was not their home and there's a better place that we're going to help them transition to. Okay. But in the end, I had to say to her, okay, you got to help me here. Okay, I don't know where they're coming from now, but you're just too open. You got to shut these frickin' doors. You don't let them in. And when they are in, you got to help me push them out. Don't make me do all this work. In other words, trying to get her to take self-responsibility.
Right.
All right? Now, I have no idea what they were. I kind of suspect they are transpersonal entities. That, it is something like that. But I don't need to believe that. This, it'd be clunky, but you could reduce this to Jungian terms, some type of personification of some type of traumatized complex. But the point is, with somebody like this, psychotherapy will not work unless you call that what I'm doing psychotherapy. It's ritual exorcism, okay? It's very ancient technology of the sacred for resolving this kind of a problem. And you're right about the warrior energy there.
Right. So I have a question. So how can we bring this technology, this sacred technology, into the collective, into our world?
Do you want to tell them about what our art that's in creation?
Well, that's a little different, but that you understand very clearly how about the shadow projection into our society and all this repressed shadow energy that's taken over our culture, and our culture is imploding. America is imploding on itself, and we're in an environment here in the San Francisco Bay Area where most people are very asleep, and then the ones that are actually interested in more alternative therapy or quote-unquote new age or spiritual practices, they avoid the shadow areas, and they don't want to admit, and they don't want to go and take response. What you did for that woman, it took a lot of this work, but ultimately it came down to taking self-responsibility in order to heal. And that means part of self-responsibility is the willingness to go into these shadow areas that are not being metabolized. So how do you think that we can bring this more into our culture?
Well, people want to be comfortable. They don't want to be humiliated. They don't want their self-esteem to take a dip.
Yep.
And how it could not. I'm embarrassed by what's happened since this election, the whole election process, campaign process and everything.
Yeah.
And see my fellow Americans behave in such an appalling way. I know I'm part of that, I'm part of the American fabric. And I have an international presence. This is embarrassing, to take, and the rest of the world can see what it is. But people want the easy way. They want it smooth. They want it as pretty as possible. And I'm sad to say, even many Jungians, the highest levels of individuality and creativity aren't in the analysts. There are a few of them, like Marion Woodman and I mentioned James Hillman. They're okay. But most people that go into this are going to spend a lot of money and they want the big credential. It's kind of an aristocratic psychotherapeutic credential. And they want to drive their Jaguar. They want to enjoy their swimming pool. They want to go to opera. They want to have nice social interactions. Okay. So that's a reflection of culture, American culture.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's shallowness and it's persona field. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there's the real deal among Jungian analysts. I just need to repeat that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, well, no, I realize that. And of course, in Jung himself. And like you said, Marion Woodman and a few others. And yes, there are real shaman in that tradition.
Yeah, what I was going to say too is that Jung went through a similar place in his time. He went through both World War I and World War II, and he saw the same thing going on, this massive shadow projection, and how Nazism started, and he ended up, it seemed like, going back into his own process.
Receding away from it because everyone couldn't be reached.
Yeah, I haven't thought much about the World War II thing. I know that's somewhat true from what I do know, but I thought more about the First World War. But, he had the traffic with the Nazis and even got accused of being a Nazi, even though his closest associates were Jewish,
Yeah.
But he did make some mistakes. The convention of the day was to talk about the Jew, and it wasn't always in a positive term that Jung speaks of the Jews. So he inadvertently set himself up for charges of Nazism. But actually, that whole thing was repugnant to him.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And he did think of the whole Nazi thing as part of the mass psychosis that was going on.
Okay, so it sounds like, we've been talking for a long time, and I get the feeling that probably all of our energy is probably waning. So
yeah, right, there's an energy curve. Hey, we can talk again. Maybe you will find some things on this you want to go into further and, or open up. I'm aware we didn't address everything,
We didn't address everything, but I think that, this is really where we wanted to go, and is where you went into when you started going into possession, and you went into the pain body, and you started talking about intergenerational and past life trauma and how it's passed on, and the being able to reprogram from the higher state, channel 9 that you called it, and you did give us this whole, you plopped onto our lap this whole kind of paradigm here and way of looking at this material, because to us, this shadow material, the more important, it's like just the first level of getting to of understanding the first level of your shadow, of like the Jungian understanding of, that which the culture denies, and you can't that you can't express into the culture or into your family or whatever, gets hidden back there and all of that, just the basic. But it goes way deeper than that. It goes into these programs, these deeper pathologies, these entities. It goes back into archetypal shadow material, back into the animal heritage, back into processes of life itself and stuff. And so there's all these deep layers of this material. And that's where we really want to go. And we started to, and we I think took a chunk out of that with this conversation, is get past the first level of, just, you look out in the healing communities, or just the sort of mainstream alternative, new age and alternative healing, and everyone's talking about the shadow now, but they're at that first level. And where we're going with you on this is, boom, down into some real nasty programs that are running.
Yeah, right. And maybe running throughout the universe.
Yeah.
And that may be running throughout the universe,
exactly.
and certainly in the collective field of humanity.
Jung, it's the cosmic anima. This is the cosmic soul or psyche. Before he died, he had stretched the psyche to envelop the whole universe. So in that move, he became more shamanic and mystical.
Yeah.
So that we're in the psyche rather than, or as much as, the other way around, that the psyche is on us.
Oh,
so
yeah,
if it stretches throughout the cosmos, why can't there be other beings, other entities, and not necessarily in our 3-4 dimensional space-time geometry, but in other geometries. So.
That's what Melissa keeps telling me
Yeah.
to consider.
Yep. I've had, I'm very connected, naturally, intuitive, it just comes through, and I have had too many experiences in my life to prove that to be the case, so.